that people misunderstand what racism is. People think that racism is this genetic or predisposition to tribalism or liking people that are like look like you, which is really like a scientifically complex thing. When racism, to me anyway, is just like, there's a very particular set of economic protocols, or that it starts with. Racism is, these people are going to do this work for me, and I need to dehumanize them in order to justify that. And that's what it begins with 500 years ago. So people don't understand that, and they don't understand why they feel the way that they feel. And like, I've found that when talking to people about race, you know, the most direct way to get people to confront how they feel is, when I'm talking to white people, is hand on heart, do you really believe that we're equal? Do you really not think that white is good and black is bad? Because if people really examine that, they realize, actually, yeah, they do believe in this hierarchy. Yeah, they do believe in this thing. And they don't even necessarily understand why. And then you say, okay, right, where do all the resources come from? Whether they're human resources or land or minerals and so on. You know, we're getting our food and all these things from places that have space near the equator with people of darker skin. That's been the history of the world for the last 500 years, 400, 500 years. That's the foundation of what we know today as racism. It is not the same as, I'm going to protect what's my own. Those are different things. You know what I mean? Like a systematic system of dehumanization is quite different from kind of some genetic predisposition to protect one's family. And when you look at the history of racism or the history of anti-blackness, somehow those things have been conveniently pushed like into a convergent space, right? So you have all these people on the you know, the white supremacists. They talk about blood and soil and family and sovereignty and all of these things, right? You know, because actually, to say what the truth is, those people are the humans. You know, when we encountered them, were the humans and the guardians of the things that we wanted, which was space, free labor, to break out of feudalism or break, you know, away from excesses of like European feudalism at that time. Natural resource. And obviously land, right? Like, that's what it is. So we have to get the church to sort of define them as soulless. We have to categorize them as beasts and look at them as animals and put ourselves at the top of this natural order that we are the defenders of. And we have to kind of enshrine that into our ideas of self. I think it's a sickness that's killing everyone. It's just that I think maybe I'm speaking as a black person, like, we know it. Like we've seen it, you know, we've felt it. So like what I always say to people is just stop lying. Like, you know, to racist people or people who are racist believe they're not racist, or just everyone in general, let's stop lying about it. We know what this is. You know, that's like me sort of having grown up in Britain and sitting in a comfortable house and, with all of my things around me and saying, oh, I'm not privileged. As I look at my phone that is, like made of things that are like, taken from elsewhere, like for not very much. And I've got all of this power, all of this energy that's used, again, like drawn from, materials or fuel that comes from the earth in an often unfair exchange. Like I know that my share of the pie is larger. So, and that's not fair. I know why it is. So I won't lie about it. So when we're talking about racism and we're talking about white supremacy, let's stop lying about it. Like, let's stop pretending that it's not a thing and that to talk about it is to foment disruption that doesn't need to happen. Why should I in 2021 or 2020, why should I have to accept a world in which my life is somehow less than someone else's? Or that those people's, someone else's is less than mine? And don't tell me that that's not the case, because it is. And I'll never accept that, and I'll never sort of, I'll never be okay with that and just think, yeah, it's fine, we just let it go, because I think it's killing everybody. In 2016, somebody asked me, "What do you think the greatest threat to world peace is?" And I said, white supremacy. And they looked at me and they said, "Really? That's a bit like really in 2016? You really think that?" This is before Trump was elected. And I said, this guy's going to win, and it's going to be because of the oldest trick, in the same trick that's been perpetuated over and over and over and over and over again for the last, half a millennia. Like, just tell the white people that they're better than everybody else, so that the top sliver can continue to cheat everyone. And they just create a guard around them of people that will protect that for the crumbs that they get from that master's table. And it will work. And it will continue to work until we actually understand the history, we understand why this happened, how it happened. I think what's been really interesting to me is, like, over the period of this summer, is watching so many people kind of educate themselves for the first time, and they can't believe some of the things that have just been there in plain sight. And people sort of realizing, wait a minute, systematic or structural racism is a real thing. It isn't just somebody, it's not calling you a name, or it's not the same as describing a physical attribute, it's not, which is strange in and of itself. Let's be real about it. So people don't say how they really, really feel. And I think the days are kind of over. The thing that kind of stuck out to me was somebody wearing a t-shirt in the Black Lives Matter protest saying, "We're the descendants of the slaves you couldn't kill." That's how it feels. I remember having a conversation with my mum during the time, and she was a bit like, "Oh, we went on the marches, and just that's the way." And but my brother's just saying, "Well, yeah, everybody went on the marches and everybody fought for civil rights, and yeah, and that was a great thing, but what changed though? You know what I mean? Like, what changed? So along comes this disease, and we're just supposed to die more than everyone, saying we're supposed to being incarcerated more than everyone, and what do we have to achieve to prove that we're human? Like, let's just stop that. Let's stop that game. And she didn't have anything to say. And I feel like that's sad, that after all these years, that generation that fought for so much are just like, they feel the futility. And it's come to how I feel about it is this is not something that Black people, anti-Blackness is not something that Black people can solve. We can't modify our behavior out of it. This is a sickness within non-Black people that they just won't confront. And it's rotting our societies from the inside out. And I think particularly in Britain, there's this idea that, well, it doesn't affect us and we're tolerant and we're multicultural and so on. But like the fact that we're even having this conversation, and it proves that we're not. The massive percentage of Black people that would argue very differently proves that we're not. Well, all these people lying are just saying it to say it. Like, that's not true, is it? So yeah, that's how I feel about it. I did this installation because I was asked to produce a work, like a spatial work, and I felt like that's the thing, isn't it? There's never been, no one's ever examined this disaster. No one's ever thought about it, like what caused this. It's just we'll just bury it, right? It happened 200 years ago. There's no problem here. Stop crying. That's like kind of against thousands of years of jurisprudence, otherwise we wouldn't just say, oh, it's done now, get over it. Why do we have courts? Why do we have laws? Why do we have prisons? Why do we have this sense of justice if we're just going to slide over misdeeds? And I think in Britain, that's what's happened. Misdeeds have been really slid over because actually there is this pervasive sense that you Blacks, you got a good deal. I feel like I've been lucky enough to hear the truth of how people feel. Pre the internet and pre any sense that there would be any comeuppance if you said these things. I've heard it. You guys were living in mud huts before we met you. You know what I mean? Like, we brought civilization to the world. If you don't like it, you can go home. And you still hear that now. Just you don't have to look far for it. People know, they hear their family members say it. They know how pervasive it is. We've got politicians that are trading on this. So don't tell me that it doesn't exist. And so because of that, there's no assessment of these things. And because of that, there isn't any understanding of where the wealth of this country really comes from and how and on whose backs. So we don't talk about it, it never changes. We don't discuss it, it never changes. We don't face it, it never changes. When we attempt to, the whole thing gets subverted as if it's a political opinion as opposed to an examination of a crime against humanity. So it's self-sealing unless one tries to disrupt that, right? And for me, like, culture and art is a kind of point where you can engage with people, and they're receptive to you can engage with people who are receptive, but it's one way of maybe influencing some minds to think beyond or to investigate beyond their what they perceive to be true, and partly because I think it just appeals to those inquisitive minds. But I think there are limits to that, and I kind of, my work's often like, I guess, an investigation of that tension, right? Because I would love to think that we could change the world with our arts, but actually, a lot of the time things have not changed that way. So I guess I try and sometimes maybe make work that is confrontational or it's still art, but at the same time, I can't just make things that don't make people feel a little bit, like feel something and feel a little bit, I feel like they should try to examine or try to understand, because that's the point. I'm trying to get people to stop and think and to examine what they perceive to be normal. And particularly with this issue, I thought this place, has a history of being owned by people that were heavily involved in the slave trade in the Caribbean. And there's no monument to it. There's no discussion of it. And there are thousands of buildings like that in the city and in this country. There are massive art galleries that are built from slavery, and they have artworks that depict slavery inside them. And people it's like, we don't want to talk about it. And that's quite insane to me. Or if we do, it becomes a debate, as if it didn't happen, or we shouldn't tell the truth because it's embarrassing for what we perceive as being respectable in Britain. And I feel like I want people, when they are in spaces that are to do with British respectability, or certainly have that air, just always to remind them of what that is: subjugation of non-powerful people by powerful people. And I view that as a disaster. It's inefficient. I feel like it doesn't make sense, this kind of grand larceny. And I started looking at this piece through that lens as slavery in the Caribbean is a disaster. My mum's family from Grenada, and there's a place there called Sauterres. It's called that because it's exit. It's where the native people who live there, rather than being enslaved like the Africans they saw being brought in, they went and en masse jumped into the water. So, by any measure, that's a disaster. And so I felt like I wanted to make something that wasn't just about like suffering and some monument in that regard, or something that was to do with honor or all of these things that I feel are important, but I don't, it's not really what my work's about. I wanted to make something that was kind of about looking at what happened and something that symbolized that. And I thought about when an accident happens, if a plane crashes, there is a recording of it. There is a machine that tells you what happened. And I feel like I wanted to make some kind of machine structure that kind of symbolized that, signified that, but also had its purpose. And not literally, not just, okay, here are more black bodies. We've all seen the images of people being whipped and the scars and the chains. And, you know, I have to think a lot of that stuff, it just serves to actually reinforce. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I don't want to make work like that. And this was more about, and is more about trying to ask people to investigate this thing, go away and arm themselves with the knowledge. Because once you do, I do think it can lead to a certain amount of at least pragmatic understanding of how the world is, why the world it is today, and like our place in it as British people, combat racism, or just don't be racist. You know, like, or don't accept racism. The thing is, once you see this, you can't unsee it. And I think any advice that I've got to people that are trying to tackle racism in themselves and in their families and so on is see it. Allow yourself to see it. Even if it shatters your comfortability, because what it's basically admitting is our guardians, our stewards, our society that's got something fundamentally rotten at its core. That can't be the way. The world must be good. You know, like, I see the good in the world. I see the good in the world, but I also see the bad. And I would just say to people, allow yourself to see it. And once you can, you can't unsee it, and you feel compelled to do something about it.
Hi everyone, I'm Tolani Shoneye, or Tolly T, depending how you know me. I always find it weird introducing myself. I am a writer, podcaster, and I produce and I do a bunch of other things as well. I talk a lot and I write a lot is basically the gist of what I do. I'm a black woman. Surprise! And so very early on, I always knew that I wanted to work in the media. I was 16 was it 16? Whatever age you are when you're in year 10, when I did a work experience at Sugar magazine. And from that moment on, I was like, okay, I want to be a journalist. And I remember going into the office and being a little black girl and didn't see anybody that resembled me being a little black girl in that office and in that space. And I'm big on it's really hard to be what you can't see. If you don't see yourself there, if you don't see people that look like you there, it's really hard to think that it's just possible for you to do it. And because of that, I used to go out of my way to look for people who looked like me in whatever spaces I was, and came across June Sampong. And I talk about June Sampong with all the fondness and all the love in my heart, because it was seeing her on television with her lip gloss popping. And I was like, oh my God, there's a black woman on TV and she's British and she's dark skinned and she's from African descent. And I thought, I want to do that. I also want to be that person. I didn't know what facet that was going to be at the time, but I knew I wanted to work in the media. So decided on journalism, kind of did the typical school, college, university, and all the steps you go to when you're meant to do that as well. And being a black woman and my mum, being Nigerian, education was paramount. We had to go to school, we had to get a degree. And so my mum is very proud that all three of her kids have a degree. And you could tell by the outfits that she was at graduation. She went all in. So after university, did the thing worked in different places. Again, used to always find myself being the only Black woman in certain spaces. And I worked as a beauty journalist, eventually, like towards my career. And I'd go to events and I'd do so many different things, and it would just be me in certain rooms. And it was always a weird, it always used to make me feel really, I guess, uncomfortable, because it's like I don't understand why we're not in these spaces. And I'd have to write about beauty that didn't really pertain to Black beauty, just because apparently, like women don't read these things. I've never understood it, especially being a Black woman and knowing how much I spend on hair and makeup, especially my wigs. Like, so there was a market, talk to us sort of thing. And again, early on, I decided in my career that I wasn't going to, I remember being asked, I did a talk at university, and one of the students asked me, she was like, how comes you don't work for a magazine that's aimed at a Black audience? And I decided very early on that I wasn't going to do that, because I went to work somewhere that put Black stories in the forefront. I didn't want you to have to go to a random hair shop in Peckham to find the magazine. I wanted it to be in your face. So when I worked for BuzzFeed, I made it my goal to consistently talk about Black stories, untold stories, talk about Black beauty, and to not explain it. I think sometimes in beauty and in journalism, when we talk about something that is in relation to Blackness, for example, if I talk about Bantu nuts, there's a narrative to kind of explain what a Bantu nut is. And I refuse to do that. I'm like, because when I read magazines that was aimed at white women, no one explained to me what a balayage is or anything like that. And I use the perfect example of when I used to watch television when I was younger, and I'd watch white women go shower and they'd wash their hair. I'm like, every time. Like, I used to be so confused because it was so far removed from my world. And I was like, oh, that's just a normal thing to watch. And that was never explained to me. It never had to be explained because it was made the norm. So I'd always said that in my writing, in my work, I wanted to make Blackness my story, especially as a Black woman, the forefront of it. Like, I love Black women with all of my being. I am everything I am because of the Black women who have loved me, who have read my work, who have listened to me. So like, that is like my life's goal, is to make us as visible and as lit as possible. 2020 has been an interesting year in all of its facets. And for me, what's been the most interesting, I feel like for some people, Black people just started existing. I feel like prior to this, I don't know if they didn't see us on the road, they didn't see, it was like Black people sort of thing. And there's something that comes with all of the noise that makes sort of thing. And for me, initially, when the noise started, I had got to a point where I was like, I am sick of watching people that look like me get hurt by the police. I'm sick of watching people that look like me be arrested for no reason, be killed, literally killed in broad daylight. That is awful for me. And it's even more awful to watch as a Black person as well. And I think it should be awful for anyone. So the movement it's not a movement for me. It's my life, a part of it. And as great as being Black is, I never want to dim it down by talking about all of the bad things that in terms of the world gives you because you are Black. That comes with it. Things that people say in their experiences are very, very real. And these are not experiences that just came about because of 2020. These are experiences that I've been going through my whole life. It was really interesting seeing the parallels of people talking about racism in America compared to racism in the UK. And you hear it a lot. British people are convinced the UK is not racist. They are convinced by it because to them, well, we don't shoot you. So therefore, it is non-existent. And people are always like, oh, it's so subtle in the UK. It's not subtle. Racism exists in the UK and it's also very violent. It is awful. I remember and during this whole time, a lot of memories get brought back up of all the trauma that I'd faced. I grew up in Essex and my area was very, very, very racist. I mean, in terms of when we first moved into the area, they had the N-word on our front doors and used to egg us when we were at bus stops. So I was a lot younger. I was 10 years old at the time. And I remember in school, would come out of school and there was a racist family that lived across the road from school and they would set dogs on the Black kids. And to have that experience, for many people that I know to have that experience, for many Black men that I know to be chased by white men who want to hurt them or something, and then to hear people say, oh, but it's not racist, or oh, it's a lot more subtle. It's not subtle, it's very violent. And even the subtles are still very violent. They're an act of violence. I find the idea that anger is an emotion that many Black women try to keep inside because it's been made to sound so negative. Like the angry Black woman is a consistent narrative. You hear it all the time. You see it in films. And because of that, you feel like you have to hold in your anger. But like, I have many reasons to be angry. And I'm a big fan of feeling all of my emotions, not just the nice ones. And recently, a lot of my emotions have not been nice. And so why should I keep that in? And I find that with me, action in me, anger in me evokes action. That is the one emotion that when I'm angry, I want to get things done. I want to change things. Like it's what evokes me to go to protest. It's what evokes me to speak out loud because I am angry and I'm fed up, sort of thing. And I think for me, anger is better than being tired, because there have been times when I felt tired, and tiredness just makes me want to give up. And it's those like spells of anger that evokes action in me, and it evokes that like, I can't give up, things have to change. So Black women trying to run away from anger or it not being, and I think that's the thing. I think for many Black women, there's this idea of you want to be seen as a nice person. I say often, I'm not a nice person. And people are like, why would you say that? You're such a nice person. No, I'm not. And I don't have to be. Like, I'm very much allowed to not be a nice person. And I don't think everybody has to be a nice person. There's a difference between being kind and being nice. I'm a kind person, I'm a reasonable person, but I'm not always a nice person. Because I think niceties means that you're like, you keep quiet, you just take things in, you're not angry. I wish I'd kind of embraced anger a lot earlier in my life, because if I'd embraced anger a lot earlier in my life, certain things would not have happened to me. Or if they did happen to me, I would have spoke up about it. But because I was so afraid to be deemed as an angry Black woman, I didn't speak up about it. And I think that narrative is there to shut us up. There was you want to be seen as such a pleasant person so badly you don't say anything. And all of this is for who? For the white gaze, for people to think, oh, she's not like the other Black women. No, I'm very much like them. And I can also not be like them, and I'm angry. And if you had to watch people that look like you get killed, if you had to experience certain things that I've experienced, you too will be angry as well. But then there's joy in being a Black woman. There is so much joy in being a Black woman. Like, I wouldn't change it for the world. I mean, like, we age well. Look at me, I look great. We're just brilliant people. We love hard. We work so hard. Yeah, so as well as the anger, I kind of also like to tame the joy in this world. I think that sometimes sitting in the anger and having to consistently reflect on what's happening can strip away your joy. And I'm so here to see joyful Black women. It's in the way they laugh. It's in the way they encourage each other. It's in the way we dance. There's so much joy to be had as a Black woman. And also there are things to be angry about, and rightly so. It's really interesting, this idea of people doing things to help change. Because like I said, it's like, this can't be new. Like, your friends have been telling you these experiences for years, but you've never believed them. And I think one thing you can do to change is listen to people. I think sometimes when you're telling your experiences, people get their back up. Well, I'm not racist. Well, my next door neighbour's wife is Black. And it's not an attack on you. I'm telling you my experiences. Listen. Like, I think there is a thing to definitely to be like, the first thing to do is to listen to people. Just listen to what their experiences are. Like, there were things I don't know about. I educate myself on it. I go read. And I think one thing I'd also say is that, like, leave your Black friends alone. Like, they're not the ones that are going to solve every issue in the world for you. Like, let them have some respite. Like, you go and do the work yourself. Because, yeah, leave your Black friends alone. Like, let them experience joy. Let them be okay, and you go do the work yourself. There's so much research. There's so much books. There's so many articles online. Like, listen to it. Take it in. Like, I don't believe in white saviorism. I don't believe white people are going to save me. And yeah, like, I definitely don't believe in it and things like that. And I just think that, like, just go and educate yourself. Like, go and educate yourself. Be aware of the privileges you have as well. And just go from there. I think that's the first step. Educate yourself. Be aware of your own privileges. I'm aware of my privileges as a Black woman that I have against other people. I'm aware that I'm more privileged because I'm able-bodied. There's so many things I'm aware of, and because of that, have empathy for things that people do not have. That's what I would say change. Listen, educate yourself, and leave Black people alone to feel joy. it's really hard to dig deep in yourself, especially when it feels like someone is accusing you of something negative. Like, so, oh, I've never done that. I would never do that sort of thing. Oh, it's not my, like get called out and be like, oh yeah, of course. It's not an attack. It's just kind of time for you to educate yourself and do better. Like, just do better.
Don't cry, don't speak, don't talk, no, never we, remember we, on nobility.
My current interest, cut out the white noise. My current interest, cut out the white noise. Keeps talking. You be fine, just follow the steps like moi moi. My current interest, cut out the white noise. My brethren can test just to pound down the highway. He keeps talking. Another chatter walking with two henchmen. Another matter who will be the defendant. Another lad sorting out the suspension. Full throttle, please excuse. What a perfect time to bounce. Another factor in this lesson. Another client I ain't showing affection. Another client on spot the tension. Yet another cancer in this Benson. I need another witness, you do splendid. Another trapper talking about his new engine. Another actor in one's presence. Another playlist someone mentioned. What, where, who? What a perfect time to glance. Sorry, don't take crumbs. I'm on one. Look, my current interest, cut out the white noise. Be fine, just follow the steps like moi moi. My current interest, cut out the white noise. My brethren can test just to pipe down the hype boy. Another bonus in this blessing. Bonus, I'm pressing. Another fold up in this section. Look, uncle or silver spoon, what a perfect time pie chart. Another poker, he's a legend. Might as well make sense. Another, that's the heading. Another mine is 397. I just want another happy ending. I need another smoothie, bullet, blended. Another mistress seeking friendship. Another feeling legged. Another not interested. Just tested. This figure's got 20 questions, but I let you have one. It's genetics, my face always long. My current interest, cut out the white noise. He keeps talking. You be fine, just follow the steps like moi moi. It's not hard. My current interest, cut out the white noise. My brethren can test just to pipe down the highway. He keeps talking. My brethren can test just to pipe down the highway.
Can I become us when I fall every rush? Can't talk about love when we're living in the dust and the dirt and the earth. So remember, this isn't our world. Romance and our gold.
Well, the history of the modern world really is the history of racial inequality. When you think about what makes the West, the kind of important turning point is 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. There is a reason why Christopher Columbus is the most celebrated person in the United States, with cities, roads, schools named after him. And he never actually went, never set foot in what is now the United States. Because that move over to the West was such an important part of founding what we have today. So the genocide in the Americas, the enslavement of African people for 300 years, generating untold amounts of wealth. That was kind of essential to have industrial progress, to have the Industrial Revolution. If you think about the very first things which were processed and I'm in Birmingham, and people in Birmingham very proud of James Watt and the steam engine. Well, the very first thing processed by the steam engine was sugar from Caribbean plantations. And then cotton became really important as well. Both of those two commodities were slave produced for centuries. So in order to have this world and all this technology and everything that we have currently now, it was built on the idea that black life doesn't matter, that it's expendable, that it can be enslaved, that the land can be taken in the Americas, in Africa, etc. And so white supremacy is kind of built into the modern world. There's a reason why Africa is the poorest continent on the world, and the places where white people live, the West is the richest, and there's this kind of hierarchy in between. That is white supremacy. It's not an accident that that's the way the world looks today. So we really shouldn't be surprised that in the 21st century, we're still having to say Black Lives Matter, because if we're honest, in the political economy, they really don't. Yeah, so what is Black Lives Matter about? It's about the problems of racial inequality. And you literally, if you look at the States or the UK or anywhere with descendants of slavery or colonialism, there's no way to explain the issue today without looking at that history. So here in the UK, for example, my family is from the Caribbean, descended from the enslaved. We have this kind of idea that once slavery ended, that was fine, it was all over, it was all great. Well, actually, no. Once slavery ended in the British Empire, there was a massive payment made in reparations for damages, but to the slave owners, right? A payment so large that it was 40% of the government's income at the time. They had to take a loan out from the Bank of England. The loan was so large that it only was paid back in 2015. So it means that my family who are descended from the enslaved have actually been paying for slave owner reparations in our taxes, which tells you just how both obscene and both absurd the system is. So after slavery ends, the people who profited from slavery got lots and lots of money. That got invested. That wealth is still with us. But the people who were enslaved and had zero, had nothing, were left with nothing, were left to work in jobs that looked very much like slavery in impoverished parts of the world, and then, eventually migrate after the Second World War to England to try and make some money and find what? Racism in housing, racism in schools, racism in the police. So all of the problems that we're having today are linked to the problems that happened previously. And it'll be the same for people migrating directly from Africa, whose countries were literally decimated by British colonialism and left with nothing. So the big problem is you have this massive wealth gap, and that wealth gap is a legacy from slavery and colonialism, and it just hasn't really been overcome. And the only real way to have any kind of equality would be to decrease that wealth gap, which would mean the kind of reparatory justice, a massive transfer of wealth, which is never going to happen. So look, this is the problem. We're in this moment which is still defined by racism, but unfortunately we don't want to understand the history and legacies of that. The key thing historically that we need to understand would be to really get rid of how we think about the nation state, right? So the problem with the way that British education and history works is that we kind of imagine the British Isles, and we see all the history through the British Isles. So I grew up learning about the Tudors and the Stuarts, the kings, queens, First World War, Second World War, as though it was just, Britain against the Nazis. But we actually forget that Britain was an empire. It wasn't. What made Britain great was the fact that it colonized 24% of the entire world. About half the population of the world at one point was in the British Empire. And the important thing here is when, my family in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, were born in Britain. They weren't born in Jamaica. Didn't exist. It wasn't a place. It was the British Empire. People who were born in India up until 48 were born in Britain. So even to see my family as being immigrants, it don't make no sense, because they weren't immigrants. They were moving from one part of the country to another part of the country, and this kind of underlies just how badly the discussion about race is in this country. And so many times I've been publicly or on TV or something and said something negative about Britain, and the response is, well, I should be grateful for all the great things that white British people have done. But if we understand history correctly, we'll understand that my family's been contributed to Britain, part of Britain, whether or not they've been located on the British Isles for as long as anybody else, right? And then that should at least make us totally have to rethink belonging and, just exactly whose responsibility is it to deal with the issue of racial inequality. Thinking about Britain and what's the legacy of black movements in Britain, the British Black Power movement is really misunderstood and essentially neglected. And what the British Black Power movement really was about education. It was about saying, this narrative you're getting from the schools is not, and not just the schools, the media, society more generally, is hugely problematic, and we need to create a completely different way of knowing, understanding. So brought in black bookshops, for instance. Again, something that we kind of take for granted now with Amazon and the internet, and you can just get all this information. I mean, 50 years ago, it was very difficult to get this information. So the bookshop movement was really, really important. Black Saturday schools, supplementary schools, where, literally the community just saying, schools aren't doing it, we can't rely on the schools, we're going to do it ourselves. Community education. So everything that I actually currently get paid to teach and am known for now, all of that, literally none of it was taught to me in a school, college, or university. All of it came from this kind of different space of community learning. And this is absolutely essential if we want to understand the world differently. And, I'm not one of those people who will say, let's petition the schools to do this, because I just don't. The schools are the schools. They do what they do, right? Schools, the principal purpose of schools is to maintain the status quo. And if we're interested in having a knowledge which transforms the status quo, then you probably have to get that somewhere else. So building back those alternative spaces of education would be really important. Because there's a quote from Malcolm X who I usually quote, but he talks about the transition when he turned from, he was a hustler, he went to prison, he was in jail, and then he started reading and hearing a completely different perspective. And he says the shift in his thinking was like snow falling off a roof. And then from that moment, everything's changed. And that for me was exactly the same way when I started reading Malcolm, started reading Claudia Jones, reading this other stuff. And I think if we're going to say where should we go if we want to have a transformative world, it really is about firstly trying to find transformative knowledge. And we are in a space now where it's much, 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 much easier. But the irony tends to be that the more access you have, the less people access it, unfortunately. We have the only Black Studies program, undergraduate degree, and the master's actually starts next year in Europe. To tell you how bad it is in the UK. Things haven't really changed that much. The reason that we're able to offer that is because we actually employ Black people, right? There's 6, I want to say 6, it might not be 6 because nobody changed, 5 or 6 full-time Black members of staff in the university. And that is so rare. We literally employ more Black people in this one department than most universities probably do as an academic staff. So the reason that that's one of the reasons there's been such a undiverse knowledge is because the staff at university is really, really white, right? It still is. And if you go more senior, you go the worse that gets. So I am one of the only 140 Black professors in the whole entire country in any subject out of the 20,000 professors in total. So there's still huge problems with the way that the university operates, and this kind of transformative knowledge, if I'm 100% honest, you ain't finding that in most places in unis because of what the university is. You shouldn't see the university separate from the school system. In fact, the reason the school system looks the way it does and the education in that looks the way it is because of the knowledge produced in universities. But having said all of that, the Black Studies, however, has had a really long history. There's the tradition I was talking about earlier. It's really rooted, it's really developed, it's It doesn't live in the university. It shouldn't live in the university either. And what we've essentially done is brought that community knowledge, that radical knowledge into the university space that you don't usually see. I think one of the things that has changed, maybe not changed, but the students are now demanding that they get this transformative knowledge, and whether the universities can provide that is another thing. But certainly what you're seeing with student groups through Why is My Curriculum, Why Roles Must Fall, is they're taking control over the control over the knowledge they learn. The big difference is now there's a critical mass of black students, there's sort of a critical mass of staff, and the universities have become a site of struggle over this knowledge. The example I always use is Industrial Revolution. I mean, as A-level student, I did history, we did the Industrial Revolution, and what was my teacher say? I was having all these, what are the causes of the Industrial Revolution? And we went through British, like the Protestant work ethic. It's all about capitalism. Isn't British ingenuity great? Science, inventions, etc. Population explosion in Europe. All these things, and I'm asking. I asked the teacher, say, well, what about slavery? Slavery seemed like it'd be quite important given the time period and also the commodities. And his response was, we're not going to talk about that. It's not in the textbooks. We never had any conversation about it ever again. And unfortunately, talking to young people now, I mean, I'm not that old, but this was a while ago, it's still the same, right? The way that we think about Black history is it's an add-on, but actually the way that we understand the basic things about Industrial Revolution, or the emergence of democracy in the UK, or the wars, the Second World Wars, which are taught as though they weren't world wars, they were just wars between different white people in Europe. That's what really needs to be changed, the actual basic structure of how we teach everything. But like I said, I don't have much faith that that's going to happen. So what we should be doing is saying, well, how can we make sure that there are opportunities for that knowledge at community level, maybe in the media now if you've got access to that, and finding alternative spaces to put that knowledge out there. Yeah, so the reason that you have this really Eurocentric curriculum there's a purpose of it, right? Is to you can't keep on doing this because the logic of this hasn't changed. So again, look at global inequality, look at who's taking starvation wages to make your clothes and to make all this, how they're getting the minerals that we can have any of this conversation, right? That's still based on the principle that Black and brown life is less valuable and it can be exploited. And so in order for us to continue doing this, we have to have these delusional myths that it's progressive, that it's good, that Britain has a really positive history. And to acknowledge that actually, no, slavery, colonialism, genocide are just as, if not more important than the positives, would undo that whole entire myth and delusion about where we are and what we are currently doing. So that's why it's not taught. And like I said, I have very little faith that it will be taught in the mainstream, because the purpose of the mainstream is to keep the status quo, and the status quo is just as based on racism as it ever was. I write about radicalism, that's my passion, and in order to really deal with this problem, it's a massive structural problem, and really nothing short of revolutionary change is going to shift that, because we're talking about the basic fundamentals of the economy. But short of that, obviously that's a kind of a long-term project. There's a quote there. So actually, I have a book coming out in February, which is about all of this. What's it called? The New Age of Empire: How Racism and Colonialism Still Rule the World. And it kind of ended with "It's all terrible." And the publisher said, "Can you make it a bit more positive at the end?" So I did think about it and was like, well, this probably sounds negative, but hopefully it's not. The key thing is to really, if we can understand the nature of the problem, then we can understand the scale of the threat, right? Now, for us, it's relatively straightforward, right? Racism continues to happen. We should hopefully be able to grasp this, and you're seeing people mobilize. But the other side of this, of what white supremacy, capitalism, what you want to call it, has created a completely unsustainable system, right? Constant growth, the use of resources. If you look at the climate crisis is essentially caused by the same thing that causes racism. It's the same system, right? And if we carry on doing these things and don't change course, you're literally going to end the whole world. Like, the whole world will be over if we don't change course. So I think that's a glimmer of hope. This is not actually just a battle that says, how can we get equality for Black people? This is actually, how do we change the system so that everybody can still be here? And if we can understand it on those terms, then I do think you can start to get the kind of change that we really desperately need. And I always say revolution is possible. And I always remind people that 50 years ago, the fact that we would end up here was definitely not going to be the case. You had communism, you had Pan-Africanism, you had revolutionary movements. The West was really teetering on this might not happen at all. And that's 50 years isn't really that long. That's not even a lifetime. So the whole thing can change in the next 50 years. So it's, even though I'm saying you need to change the whole structure, it is little things, it is little steps. And it does start with, one, really acknowledging the scale of the problem. Two, I think we then have to start, I think the key thing really is to stop having faith in the systems which have produced the very thing that we don't like, right? So for instance, like I'll always vote, like, because it's the better of two evils, right? Like which one you get. But Labour, Tories, Lib Dem, that's not really the solution. The solution is how do we build alternatives? And this is essentially why the education piece of this is really important. Because if we can shift the way that we think about the problem, we'll shift the way that we think about the solution, and we'll start building different ways to engage, which are absolutely essential if we want fundamental change. Day to day, what can people do? One is education, so you're not going to get the education from the school, so stop, right? There are plenty of places you can go and find stuff, whether that be books, whether that be online. Actually, one of the things we've started doing, we started the Harambee Organization of Black Unity and have a website called Make It Plain, which is all about presenting a kind of radical analysis of society. It's make-it-plain.org. Two, there are organizations out there. So, join organizations, support organizations, organizations like Black Lives Matter is out there. Join them, give money for them, support them. And also obviously there's individual things you can do. Like, again, this isn't necessarily the big thing, but all of us work in institutions. We've all probably witnessed racism. We've all probably seen it. We've all probably let it go. Don't let those kind of things slide. Like if you work in a place and there's no Black people, maybe you should say to somebody, this is a problem, right? So there are many things you can do on a day-to-day level, and maybe all of these things can add up as well. Yeah, so the book is New Age of Empire: How Racism and Colonialism Still Rule the World. You can actually pre-order it from anywhere you can get books, effectively, and it comes out in February. And the other thing would be to support the site Make It Plain, make-it-plain.org, and it's a free site. Where we're trying to get different people writing for it. But there's a kind of thing that needs support as well. So if anybody is interested, please do check it out. And there's a book club attached to it where I go through every so often. Pick out different books and go through them. So again, trying to think about the educational piece there as well. It's definitely. Yeah, it's definitely a welcome approach to kind of embrace maybe might not be the right word, but to lean into the history of slave ownership and the problematic history of the organization. And also to do that through art is interesting, because I think when we think about education, we don't always necessarily think about, education isn't just going to school or just reading a book, or, there's many ways to get different information. And so like an installation like that is really a very accessible way to tell that story. And I mean, this is a really important first step that the society essentially needs to do, right? Like go back through, look, what does that mean? And I guess the challenge then would be to say, well, what does that mean for now? Because I always stress here is that this isn't historical, like this is still with us. Like the legacies of that are very much still playing out now. But it's the first step is to actually understand what the history is. And then the second step is to tell people about it. And the third step would be, well, how do we address that in the current moment?
Tap into the part of you that evokes kindness. Because I think if you've tapped into that opens you up to be a different person. I think when you tap into that, kindness comes so much more things. It comes with empathy, it comes with listening, it comes with so many things that will make you a better human being.